Hello everyone, and welcome to video number 11 in the Safe Passage series. I hope you've each had a good week. One of the things I did this week was meet with my younger sister, whom I haven't seen in months, so it was great to get together with her at safe social distancing. And one of the things we did is that we went out to Flusherton, Ontario, to the cemetery there to plant some flowers on the grave of our parents. This is somewhat of an annual tradition that we do, and it's usually in conjunction with a service that's called the Decoration Day services. But of course, with COVID-19, those types of community gatherings have been canceled for this year. So I thought I'd start today just by acknowledging that and sharing with you a poem that I created a few years ago at the request of the committee in Flusherton that was planning the Decoration Day services that year. And if you've never actually had a chance to go to one of those services, I really highly recommend them. There's something very moving about meeting with a group of people who are there also to honor their friends or their relatives and that have gone on, and it's just a really moving experience that sadly often is not well attended, and I can't quite understand that because I just find it very, very moving and meaningful, and I encourage you to attend them. So while I read this, maybe you could just imagine that you are standing at the gravesite of somebody very dear to you, and I hope these words mean something to you. I called it Untitled. What is it, I wonder, about this place of quiet reverence, a spiritual space, where we gather today in shared respect for loved ones we've cherished and will never forget? Is it the comforting solace our hearts can feel when we stand in silence or carefully kneel before a stone whose markings relate with solemn precision the names and the dates, those poignant reminders that for a breath of time we walked this earth with spirits sublime, whose presence we feel on this sacred ground where hopes and dreams and memories abound? Or is it the longing to keep them near in some tangible way, should we start to fear that their heavenly journey will take them away, though our love and devotion would bid them stay? Or is it the wish to remember them still, with flowers and tokens that seek to fill an empty space that nothing or no one can ever replace? Or maybe we've come to mend a rift, or heal a hurt time set adrift, when death's firm hand snatched the chance away to right a wrong with a debt to pay. Or is it our human need to know that those we honor here below now hold the shimmering golden key that unlocks all life's mystery? Though our reasons may vary that brought us today, we share a common bond in the opportunity to pray that the loved ones who lie in this hallowed ground will rest in peace, paradise found. So for today's video, I would like to tell you a little story about another graveyard visit that happened in the year 2008 at a cemetery in Huntsville, Ontario. My sisters and I had gone up there that day because it had been 4 years to the month of August that my Aunt Margaret had passed away. She was a very dear aunt to our family. And I mentioned in an earlier video that my father had grown up with his family in Ceylon, Ontario at the Flusherton CPR station. So his sister Margaret had grown up there too. And unlike my dad, Margaret did finish high school and she went to Toronto to take her teacher training. And because there were not a lot of positions available in Grey County at that time when she graduated, she went further north into the Muskoka region. And she taught at many one-room schools up in that area. One of them was in a little village called Emsdale, which is a few kilometers north of Huntsville. And while she taught there, she boarded at the home of the brother of a man that she soon came to admire very much. His name was James Frederick Mitchell MacDonald, and in time we would come to know him as simply Uncle Mac. But she was intrigued with this gentleman because he was very well respected in the area. He held many community offices. He was one of the early real estate agents up in that area, and he just had a commanding presence. So I don't know if you will be able to see this very well, but this was a photo of my Uncle Mac. My aunt shared with me one time a quote from Julius Caesar that she felt applied to her husband, and it was, "His life was gentle, the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man." So for a few years they were friends, and there was just one little issue. There was quite an age difference. My aunt was 30 at the time, and Mac was 60. It didn't bother my aunt terribly much, but it was of a concern to Uncle Mac. And so their friendship developed, and to the point where when my aunt decided she was going to take a position outside of the Emmsdale area, my uncle didn't think that should happen. So he went and had a little chat with his minister and explained about his concern with the age. And the minister said that he felt they actually were a very good couple, well matched, because my aunt seemed more mature than her years, and Uncle Mac seemed much more youthful than his 60 years. So he proposed to my aunt, and they married, and they had a 30-year marriage. My uncle passed away in 1976, and he was buried on February the 14th in 1976 on Valentine's Day. So that's kind of an important date to remember for the story, because 11 years after he passed away on Valentine's Day, the date that he was buried, my aunt received a phone call from a very nice woman who explained that she was in possession of a photograph album that she felt might belong in her husband's family, my aunt's husband's family. So my Aunt Margaret remembers saying that that was the best Valentine present she could ever have received, that phone call. 20 years earlier, the woman who made that call had found the photograph album in an antique store in Toronto. And she knew as she flipped through the pages that this album must have been lost. No family would ever willingly let it out of their possession. The photos were just so dear. So she spent the next 20 years trying to locate the family to whom it might belong. And she started in Toronto, where she found the album, and there had been mention of a place called Mitchell, so she kind of searched around there, and there had been mention of a place called Emmsdale, which she'd never heard of. But a few years later, 20 to be exact, she and her family purchased a home in Gravenhurst, and as she was looking through the local telephone directory, she noticed a community called Emmsdale with one listing for a MacDonald. So on that date, she called my aunt, and they arranged for a meeting where she could present the photograph album to Aunt Margaret. And this is a little photograph of my aunt and uncle in their younger days. And their story was actually written up in an issue of Ontario Living. And it was the story of finding that photograph album and it being returned to my aunt. This was one of the photos that intrigued the woman who kept that book all those years until she found the owner. That little boy in the center there would have been my Uncle Mac as a child. And the story was called Finding Freddie's Family. So my uncle was buried in 1976, and my aunt passed away in August of 2004. So the date that my sisters and I went to the graveyard was August 2008, 4 years after her passing, and just a few days really before the actual date in August. So this is rather an important detail to remember now. I'll try to get this straight. So she passed away on August 29th, 2004. So it was now August, I think a few days before the 29th of '08, August '08, that we visited. And after we had spent some time there, paying our respects, we decided to drive to the community of Emsdale, and we stopped in front of the home where they had lived. And it seemed to me a good idea that we should just knock on the door and introduce ourselves and tell about our connection to their home. So we did so. We knocked on the door, and a lovely woman came, answered the door, and when we told her who we were, she said, "Oh, I am so glad that you've come because we wanted to connect with Margaret's family." Said that when they had taken over the house, and it was a house that I was responsible for clearing out completely of its contents after my aunt passed, there had been a shed, and we thought we had cleared the shed, but she said when they went in, they noticed a loose floorboard, and when they lifted it up, there were some ledgers there that had been maintained when the property was a store and also a post office, and there was also a scrapbook. And they thought that the family, especially of my aunt, would want the scrapbook. So they were interested in keeping the ledgers for the community history, which of course we readily agreed to. And when she handed me the scrapbook, something fell to the floor. A couple yellowed pages fell to the floor. And my sister picked them up and handed them to me, and she said, "Oh, Sharon, you'll like this. It's a poem." So I'm going to read that to you now. It's called "The Flight of Ages." I heard a song, a tender song. 'Twas sung for me alone, in the hush of golden twilight, when all the world was gone. And as long as my heart is beating, as long as my eyes have tears, I shall hear the echoes ringing from out the golden years. I have a rose, a white, white rose, 'twas given me long ago, when the song had fallen to silence, and the stars were dim and low. It lies in an old book, faded, between the pages white, but the ages cannot dim the dream it brought to me that night. I have a love, the love of years, bright as the purest star, as radiant, sweet, and wonderful, as hopeless and as far. I have a love, the star of years, its light alone I see, and I must worship, hope, and love, however far it be. It is the love that speaks to me in that sweet song of old. It is the dream of golden years these petals white enfold. And every star may fall from heaven, and every rose decay, but the ages cannot change my love, or take my dream, or take my dream away. The end. August 29, '08, Emsdale. I felt these shivers in my spine for a moment because I thought, wait a minute, this is August '08, but it's not the 29th yet. And then it occurred to me that we were 2008, and this would have been written in August of 1908. So I turned it over, and there was another little writing on the back, which is kind of significant because it concerns rainbows. And I had always told my mother, when she passed away, if she could try to send a message to me through rainbows, that everything was fine, that she was still connected with us. And she kind of scoffed initially at that because she wasn't quite as esoterically bound as her daughter. But she agreed. And after she passed away, I had already committed myself to leading a church service in the Eugenia United Church. And when we arrived that day, it was in February, brutally cold day, very bright day. And as I rounded the corner to the church, there in the sky was a beautiful rainbow. And I think maybe they're called sundogs in the winter, but all I knew is I had never seen one before or after at that time of year. And the people coming to the service had seen it as well. So these little words meant a lot. Come be my rainbow, my pretty rainbow. My heart beguile, give me a smile once in a while. In rain or sunshine, my rainbow, keep your love light aglow. I love you so, my sweet rainbow. So, until next week, I just leave you with those memories and the mystery of life and how so many things are unexplained, but we just need to trust that somehow it will be explained to us sometime, even the struggles that we have, and that we just need to keep our love light aglow. So I hope you'll do that this week and that you'll tune back in next week. Thank you for listening.